Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Oh boy, I didn't know there were this many people got up this early. I don't usually, but I do make sacrifices for my recovery. My name is Winnie Eddy. I'm the wife of an alcoholic, a member of Al-Anon, and I am not always grateful for either one. I always have to say that to get me on the honesty road. I will admit that I think Al-Anon is a little more reliable than himself, however. He always says that's a matter of opinion. But he's forgotten, unfortunately, that until I got to Al-Anon, he didn't have an opinion. So, it's kind of like getting stuck with your own recovery, if you get my message. I would like to thank the committee for inviting me to come to Oklahoma. It's one of the few places I don't have to make amends to. And it's always sort of relaxing to drive through a place you haven't infected. And I got my rock, Cliff. It's a beautiful rock, and I'm going to drop it on you in a minute. I want Cliff to know that we have forgiven him. It was my duty to report him to the California Al-Anon Mafia, but it's all right. That's what my sponsor used to tell me. Anyhow, for the benefit of any of you who maybe do not know, I want you to be aware right from the very beginning that I don't happen to be an authority on Al-Anon. I haven't got the slightest idea how it works, and for that I am eternally grateful. Because if I knew how it worked, I'd change it. I just happen to have that little knack for, fixing things up. I didn't really come to Al-Anon for any of the good reasons. I didn't come because I wanted it, needed it. I didn't even know it would help me. I didn't know there was anything wrong with me. I came because I'm married to a nut, and he decided to go into the hospital and do something about his drinking, despite the help I had been giving him. And one of the conditions was that he attend AA meetings. Now, at an AA meeting, he heard about Al-Anon. And it's always been kind of a mystery to me why, while everybody else was making moccasins and wallets, he took the time to sit down and write a letter to the Al-Anon Central Office in Los Angeles and tell those complete strangers that there was something wrong with me. And when I got here, I didn't stay for the good reasons either. I didn't stay because I liked it. I didn't like it. In fact, I didn't like it to the point I tried to join Alcoholics Anonymous. I took their 20 questions test, and I flunked it. And so I went to the guy I figured was the big shot in our particular area. He was the one that always got the chair with the seat in it. Because contrary to the way meeting rooms and Alano clubs are furnished today, particularly in Oklahoma, when I came into Al-Anon, they used to furnish them with rejects from the Goodwill. And if you didn't hit your bottom before you got there, you usually did shortly thereafter, because none of the darn things had any seats in them. But this guy always got the chair that held up, He looked like a throne, really, and I figured he had to be at least a supervisor. So I went to him one day, and I confessed. I said, I think I'm an alcoholic. And he said, what makes you think so? Well, I said, I flunked your test. Well, he said, if you flunked the test, chances are you are an alcoholic. When did you have your last drink? Well, I said, I think it was about 3 years ago. And he said, lady, if it's been 3 years ago and you got to think about it, go back over with those women and let them help you. Now, I have no idea what shape you were in when you got to the fellowship, but I want you to know that at that particular time, and in the condition I was in at that particular time, being rejected by Alcoholics Anonymous didn't do a lot for me. And when I went back over with those women, I had one idea in mind. I was going to get them to help me get even with them. It was sort of my way of life, really. I was always recruiting these people to help me get even with those people. And it wasn't long before these people became those people. It was a very busy time. And the other reason that I stayed was because there happened to be one female in that group that was the nastiest woman I have ever come in contact with. And I decided to outsit her. It really wasn't so much what she said to me, because she never said anything. But she'd look at me, and she'd go... And I didn't know what that meant. And she knitted, which almost drove me up a wall, because I don't knit. And when you're perfect and you don't knit, you're in big trouble. I don't know whether you realize that or not. But anyhow, I didn't even begin to believe I was sick, which is one of the first things they told me, until I started to like her. And then I went to my sponsor and I told her, I said, I think I'm beginning to like her. And my sponsor had one answer for every situation. It's all right. I could have told her I shot my husband and she would have said, it's all right, you know. And I said, no, it's not all right. And she said, why? And I said, because I have never changed my mind about anyone. And that was the truth. You see, I used to put people in categories: those you encourage, those you tolerate, and those you ignore. And once I had you placed, you had to stay there, because I didn't know how to shovel you around. And I realized today I probably deprived myself of a lot of very meaningful relationships because of my inability to allow people to be whatever they want to be. Now, I know there are some alcoholics that are well enough to be here this morning at this hour. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give them their message first. Well, you know how they are. And truth of the matter is, I'm not even sure I got a message for them. But I talked out in Fontana one night, a little town east of where I live, and it hadn't been one of my better days, so it kind of surprised me when this gal came up to me after the meeting, and she said, where are you going to be the next time? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. Why? Well, she said, I'd like to have my husband hear you. Now, that made me think I had said something rather profound, but I couldn't remember what it was. So I decided to ask her, and I did. I said, do you think I could help your husband? Well, she said, not really, but after he hears you, he's going to be glad he got me. So... That may be the only message they get, but it works in Alateen, too. I've sent a lot of kids home, very grateful. Anyhow, I really only have one story, and I don't apologize for it anymore. I mean, there is no way I can change what I used to be like, except that today, thanks to places like this and people like you, I can use those so-called unhappinesses of the past as a stepping stone into a better way to live today. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to share a little experience, strength, and hope, tell you a little bit about what I used to be like, what happened. And in my particular case, I let you guess, because there's people in Al-Anon still don't think I'm going to make it. And that's okay, see? Because that's one of the things I learned in a room just like this. It really doesn't bother me how much they worry about me, until I begin to worry about them worrying about me. That's when I get into all the trouble. I grew up in a family where there was a drinking problem, at least I thought there was. And when I first got to Al-Anon, I used to call my father an alcoholic. But I don't know whether he was an alcoholic or not. He didn't think so. He thought he was a social drinker. He lived a social drinker, he died a social drinker. But he liked it. And when I wasn't helping him, he liked me too. But when I got to Al-Anon, I could spot an alcoholic 2 miles away. Anybody that was going into a bar, coming out of a bar, standing in front of a liquor store, or just looking strange. To me, was an alcoholic, because that's what I was accustomed to, strange people. Never knew where they came from either, but they always ended up next door to me. But you know, I had an opportunity to talk to my older son, which is a little bit ahead of the story, but that's okay. He's older than me now. Well, I told him that when he was 21, you know. He wrote me a letter and he said, "Mom, don't you think now that I'm 21, you were 25 is getting to be a little old?" And I wrote back and I said, "You keep telling the truth about your age and someday you're going to be older than your mother." And he made it. But he called me on the phone one day, not too awful long ago, and he said, "Do you think I'm an alcoholic?" And I said, "I can't tell you that. I don't know whether you're an alcoholic or not." He said, "Well, I'm not." I said, "Okay, you're not." He said, "Well, do you think I am?" And I said, "I told you I can't tell you whether or not you are or are not." I said, "But I will ask you one question that may make it a little easier for you to decide." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "How many times you been arrested sober?" And he hung up on me. So I probably won't hear from him for about 6 months. But anyhow, in growing up, for me, it really wasn't what my father did that bothered me. It's what he wouldn't do that bothered me. You see, I happen to be a born researcher. And at a very early age, I started researching fathers. Now, this takes a little footwork. You got to cover the neighborhood and watch the fathers. Then I'd come home and look at mine. He never did any of the things he should have done. And I did make some suggestions, but I was raised in a hard-headed Irish family, and my father wouldn't take direction from a 4 or 5, 6-year-old, whatever it happened to be at the time. So that's probably where I set a pattern to my life that lasted until I got to Al-Anon. I got even. I ignored him. And you better believe my ignoring him made my life more miserable than all his drinking could have done if he'd have been drinking at me. Because when I was away at school, I could be honest about my mother, my brothers, and my sister, but never my father. I always described him the way he should be, which made life rather difficult because it meant nobody could go home with me. You see, if they did, they were going to find out one of two things right now. The man that was living with my mother was not my father, or that I was the biggest liar that ever came down the pike. Now, I never considered myself a liar. I looked upon myself as a diplomat because I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the truth. And I thought there was a difference. You know, I learned also at a very early age that people anticipate what you're going to say. So you lead them up to a certain point and stop. They guess what you would have said if you'd have gone on. But they're very poor guessers. Although I never felt I should be held responsible for their inadequacies, and I even have trouble with that sometimes today, though, because since Eddie's been sober and taken an interest in my welfare, which is just a nice way of saying he don't tell me to drop dead as often as he used to. But if I'm going someplace that's quite a ways away, he usually volunteers to go with me. Now, this, at least for me, is a test of serenity, because I happen to be married to the original, don't know where he's going when he leaves. He don't know where he is when he gets there. And most times he don't know where he's been when he gets back. But if he goes with me, he directs me every step of the way, you know. And we're at opposite ends of the pole when it comes to being anything alike, because I happen to be married to a thinker. Sometimes he thinks 2-3 weeks before he answers you, you know, which really isn't as bad as it sounds. It's a marvelous memory course because you have to keep in mind everything you've been talking about, you see, because when he comes up with the answer, he never connects it to anything. He just says, yes. I'll give you a better example. Since he's given up drinking, he's taken up dusting. And that's almost as bad as drinking, believe it or not. But we happened to be playing golf one day, and I just kind of glanced over, and that son of a gun was dusting the golf cart with my sweater. And I took almost an immediate exception to it, so when I got back in the cart, I merely said to him, "When you die, I'm going to bury you in a plastic bag." And he didn't say anything, so I didn't say anything either. But about 2 weeks later, I thought we were having a friendly cup of coffee one morning, you know, and all of a sudden, he said, "I don't think that was very nice." He thought it over. He didn't like the bag idea, I guess. I don't know, but that's the way he is, and I'm getting used to it. But on the other hand, I'm one of those people that reacts immediately. I try to get it done before I really know what you want me to do. So if you put two people like that in one automobile, you do have problems. You know, in fact, just on this trip, we went 40 miles out of our way while I was waiting to find out if I was on the right road. But anyhow, I'm one of those people that I do it before I really know what you want me to do. And when you put two people like that in one automobile, there are problems. There's bound to be, you know. If we're going down the freeway and he says, "Turn right," I turn right now. And he'll say, "Not here." I'm about 40 miles too soon because I've interrupted his thinking. But anyhow, on this particular night that I'm going to tell you about, I'd been asked to come to Chula Vista, which is down near San Diego, and I was having a moment of growth. Or whatever you want to call it, I don't care. I just knew I wasn't well enough to go that far with him without running over him. And but I didn't want to tell him I didn't want him to go, see, because he gets hurt so easy. And that he mopes around and, you know, you make all these amends. You don't even know what you've done. And I didn't want to get involved in that stuff. So I just said, "I'm going to a meeting, Eddie." And he said, "Okay," and I left. But that night I didn't get home at 10:30 or 11:15. It was closer to 1:15. And when I walked through the door, there he stood, right in my spot, with that age-old question, "Where the hell have you been?" you know. And without even thinking, I said to him, "Well, how far do you think it is to Chula Vista?" Now, he accused me of lying to him, but I didn't lie to him. I didn't tell him I wasn't going to Chula Vista. And if he had said, "Winnie, are you going to Chula Vista?" I was going to say yes. Are you getting the picture? If you were bright enough to ask the right question, you got the whole story. But if you weren't, you got stuck with what you thought. And I might add, that'll get you into trouble whether you're married to a drunk or not, you know. Anyhow, I don't know what happened to the guy that I met, fell in love with, and permitted to marry me. But as soon as he was mine, I decided to help him. I wanted to help him become what I was sure he wanted to be for my sake. And I'm not even well enough yet to define that for you, but I'll tell you something I didn't tell him. And that is that my help is deadly. I actually had friends that wouldn't tell me they were in trouble for fear I'd help them, you know, because I had that sort of a built-in knack to louse things up. But of course, Eddie and I ceased to be friends. When we got married, we became competitors. He spent his life trying to outwit me. I spent my life trying to outwit him. And the upshot of the whole thing is that by the time we got here, we were a couple of half-wits. But he was in the Navy. He was a professional man, full lieutenant. And I didn't go into this blindly. As I said earlier, I'm a researcher by nature. And unfortunately for the Navy, I did a little research on them and happened to come across the table of operations. And I just happened to notice that there was only a couple of lines between what he was and what I decided to help him become, which was admiral. I knew they only had one admiral in the dental corps, but I only had one man in mind for the job, and it didn't look as difficult as it turned out to be, and it probably would have helped a little if Eddie had liked the Navy. But anyhow, I should have joined the Navy myself, probably, because I showed up every day. He only showed up when the spirit moved him, and that wasn't too often, and I'd have made a pretty good shore patrolman, too, because I got a little bit of bird dog in me. And when I'd show up and find out he hadn't made it, you know, I'd just put my nose to the ground and away I'd go. And sooner or later, I always found him. But usually by that time, he was in no shape for me to let anybody else find him. So that's when I used to hide him. We We played hide and seek for years, come to think of it, but he didn't know there was a game going on. However, after he came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I really felt I should help him with the program because I wasn't sure he was bright enough to get what they said they wanted to give him. So I went to every meeting, and I had a little notebook, and I would jot down a few of the pertinent things that applied to his peculiar case, and then I'd sort of spoon-feed it to him during the week, you know. And I want you to know I heard two things at those meetings that are worse than drinking. Lots of things are worse than drinking. Sobriety, for instance. I can only speak for myself, but I want you to know it was always easier for me to watch Eddie throw up than grow up. It just worked out that way. But anyhow, one of the things I heard was sleep teaching. I got myself a big AA book, and every night, just as he dozed off, I would open it to chapter 5, and I would read to him how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Beautiful reading. I memorized the whole 5th chapter, and Dummy slept through the whole damn thing. And I still think it's the reason when we go to an AA meeting that's outside our own area, where people don't know when you walk in, you know, really, which one's which. Would you believe it's always me they come up to? They say, keep coming back, honey, it'll work, you know. Yeah. They think I'm the drunk. I sometimes think maybe it's my hair. You know, he don't have a gray hair in his head. And he tells me it's hereditary, but I really think it's because he was preserved in alcohol for so long. But anyhow, the other thing I heard was you can't get drunk if you're grateful. Now, right after I got to Al-Anon, they took away from me some of my finer phrases, such as, you had better not be drunk tonight. If I smell liquor on your breath, your clothes will be on the porch. My neighbors thought I was some kind of a fresh air nut. I put them out every night, brought them in every morning, you know. But they wouldn't let me say that or do that, so I had to find a way to get the message across and still stay within the narrow confines of this organization. So when I heard that bit about gratitude, I just latched right onto it. Every morning when Eddie would leave for the office, I'd say, remember, today we're going to be grateful. Well, they tell you to be cheerful, you know. But they don't tell him that in AA, because he'd say, for what? You know. Ruined my whole day. And so I used to give him things to be grateful for, but I wasn't all that grateful myself in those days. So probably without even realizing it, I think I started one of the first gratitude lists. For him, that is, you know. I jotted down a few things he should be grateful for, starting with myself, of course. And while I was doing this, I happened to remember this game of hide and seek, so I explained it to him. I'm a great explainer. That's another one of my assets. I was one of those people that was never able to say yes or no. I had to give you a detailed explanation. Sometimes it was so convincing I'd change my mind right in the middle. You know, and I'm not much better than that today. The example I usually use is my wristwatch. I always wanted a watch, you know, with a little teeny-weeny tiny face, something that would sort of reflect my personality. And as soon as my eyes got bad, Eddie bought me one. I mean, you know, his timing is perfect. And I happened to be up in Kanab, Utah, and some poor unsuspecting Utah, noticing that I had a watch, asked me what time it was. Well, Eddie had given me another watch. I complained about the little one so much, and it was about that big with a band. And in my enthusiasm, I had pulled the stem out, you know, but I fixed it myself. That's an advantage most us Al-Anons have. We can fix anything. It doesn't always work, but it don't look bad. And that's, you know, sort of the advantage we have. But anyhow, I'm up in Kanab, Utah, and I've got this wristwatch on, and this poor unsuspecting Utah asked me what time it was. Well, I had to tell him about the watch with the little teeny-weeny face and the bad eyes, and getting the big one and pulling the stem out and fixing it myself. I have to keep it wound, you know. It gains 5 minutes every 24 hours. I've had it 3 years. Now, there's an hour's difference between Kanab and California, and I finally figured it out, and I looked up, and the man was gone. And, you know, I always had that strange feeling that, you know, like 007 talking to my wristwatch on a corner in Kanab, Utah. But anyhow, Eddie was a hostage, so I I did explain to him one day that when he drank excessively, it had been necessary for me on occasion to hide him. And I had put him in some rather out-of-the-way places, come to think of it, but I'd never lost him. So be grateful, you know. And I did put him in some strange places, and the one I always tell about happened down at the Long Beach Naval Station, and I tell it primarily because it points out a lot of things about me. They used to have a mock submarine just inside the sentry gate, and one morning I came across Lloyd John in front of that mock submarine with his six-pack of beer at the exact moment that I spotted his commanding officer coming from the opposite direction. Now, I had just told that man one of my better stories, which meant I had to get rid of him. You can understand, he was living proof I hadn't told the whole story. But the only place I had to put him was in that sub. And it might help you to visualize this if you knew that when I came to Al-Anon, I had one of the greatest pitching arms in the world. I could actually throw a full six-pack of beer farther than he had strength enough to retrieve it. So if I was around and he had a six-pack of beer, you know, he'd hold it. Like I was going to take it away from him again, you know. Well, anyhow, getting him in that sub isn't as hard as it sounds. I just helped him up. He fell down because he didn't know where he was going. But getting him out, that's a whole other story, you know. He didn't trust me, so he wouldn't hand me the beer. And I have many times since wondered what that sentry must have thought of that female, half in, half out of the conning tower, that darn submarine, finally coming up with this lieutenant commander holding his beer in his hat. You know, he thought he'd been torpedoed right in the middle of the Long Beach Naval Station, see? Because he didn't know where he was. And I used to worry about that sentry, you know, because I went on that base like I owned it in my housecoat and my curlers. I don't really think the alcoholic appreciates what we give up in order to help them. Now, in my particular case, it was dressing. I did have a choice. I could always go to bed in whatever I was going to wear the next day, but I don't know. I don't think I had that comfortable feeling that you get with one of them old house coats. You know, mine happened to be a chenille number. And it sort of had double duty, you know. If somebody upset me, I'd pluck it while I planned what I was going to do with them, you know. A few years ago, little Al-Anon gal gave me a chenille purse and a note, and it said, "Dear Winnie, I found the pockets to your housecoat." And I was down in Kentucky, I guess it was, and some little gal down there picked it up, and she said, "Isn't that adorable?" She said, "I'll bet you just unscrew these things and slip the handle out and throw it in the washing machine. I'll bet it comes out like new." I said, "You know what? You're absolutely right." And if I'd only known that a few years ago, I think I might have washed that housecoat, too. You know, it was one of those things. Well, anyhow, I'm sure you know how I felt when Eddie came home and announced he had resigned from the Navy. Now, I was like somebody that had lost a business because I had started to wonder about him. That part is true. But I never blamed the drinking. See, I didn't really want my husband to come to Alcoholics Anonymous and quit drinking. I just wanted him to learn to mind. See? Because I never objected to him having a drink. Sometimes I allowed him to, and there were possibly times when 3 were called for. But there was a strangeness about this man that I did not understand. It seemed like one drink and he was set in cement. I don't know how many times I used to say to him, when we are invited to a cocktail party on Friday, we can come home on Friday. We don't have to stay till Monday, you know. And part of my confusion stemmed from the fact that I liked those cocktail parties. See, I liked that nice, easy social life in the service. I didn't even mind making a fool out of myself, occasionally. He was making a career out of it, and I didn't understand it. But the strange part about it is, as his drinking increased, mine decreased. It became more important for me to know where he was, who he was with, where they were going, how they were going to get there, or what was he thinking. Have you ever tried to read somebody's mind through their eyeballs when their lids are at half-mast? It's not easy, you know. And when I first got to Al-Anon, they didn't have near the number of meetings that they have now, and so my sponsor, God love her, she used to supplement by taking me to a lot of AA meetings. And for that, I am eternally grateful, because I agree with Cliff. In my particular case, it was in Alcoholics Anonymous that I learned the true healing meaning of laughter. I used to listen to those guys get up and tell the most horrendous stories I've ever heard in my life, and them idiots laughed. And maybe an hour later you'd see somebody walk up and take a one-year birthday cake, and you could look around at those self-same faces and see a look that I have never found words adequate enough to describe. That look that more or less says to one another, thank you, God, that another human being has found the path that's meant so much to each and every one of us. Because you see, I'm a firm believer that for as many people as there are in this fellowship, there are that many ways to work it with the help of the 12 steps. And that's why it works, is because we learn to be ourselves and to live and to love the way it's comfortable for us. But you don't take somebody like me into an AA meeting at that point in my life without there being a little disturbance. The minute I walked in, I just realized almost instinctively how much they needed me. I mean, well, they said such strange things, you know, like they went around telling each other it was the first drink. And I told them it wasn't the first drink. But I couldn't remember whether it was the second or the third or the fourth, you see. But I wasn't trying to figure out what alcohol did to him. I was trying to figure out where I lost control. And I got so bad about it that one night on the way home, my sponsor said to me, Winnie, don't help him anymore, let him suffer. And the idea appealed to me, so I quit helping him. But on the outside, I more or less accepted that it was the first drink. That made him happy, it seemed like. But on the inside, I didn't accept it. I kept thinking, someday I'm going to find out exactly which one it was, and I'm going back and enlighten the whole darn bunch of them, you know, with which drink it really is. But the good Lord has a way of working in my life today. Whether I like it or whether I don't, he gets me to the right place at the right time to hear what I have to hear when I'm ready to hear it. And if you understand that, you're in the right place. But I went to a AA meeting one night, and this guy talked almost exclusively on the first drink. And after the meeting, Eddie and I ran into him in the coffee shop, which is to say we got into the same coffee shop, and I spotted him. And I said to Eddie, I think I'll run over there and tell that man that if he intends to talk at a public level, he had better be more factual. Now, I like to give the devil his due. My husband, you know, has never deprived me of making as big a jackass out of myself as I want to. So he just sat quietly while I traipsed across the coffee shop, sat down with this complete stranger, and picked his talk apart. He happened to be a railroad man from Texas. And I really think I scared the man, come to think of it, you know, because he had kind of a glazed look in his eyes for almost a full minute. But he finally got his voice back, and he said to me, well, homie, let me put it to you this way. When you get killed by a train, it ain't the caboose that did it. And I haven't had any trouble with the first drink since. Because I understand trains. I know all there is to know about trains. What I don't understand is alcoholism, because I'm not an alcoholic. I don't understand that compulsion. But through the graces of Al-Anon and a lot of people like you, I found out that it's not necessary that I know. What I need to know is what makes me tick. And so I gave it up. I don't have to know what it is. I was one of those people that they describe as being a genius. That means educated beyond your comprehension. To understand, you know. But anyhow, I just had to give things up like that, you know. It was at another AA meeting that I heard a man say, drinking was never my problem. It was my answer. And unless I can find out what my problem is, I'm doomed to go back to the only answer that has ever worked for me. Now, on the way home from that meeting that night, I turned that around. And I realized that Eddie was never my problem. He was my answer. And what I had to do was to find out what my problem was, so that it wouldn't be necessary for me to go back to the only answer that had ever worked for me. And that has worked well in my life. But I was a long way from Al-Anon back in those days. I still thought a good wife was responsible for making something out of what she gotten stuck with. So I began to wonder, what am I going to do with him? You know, I mean, making an admiral out of him hadn't been easy when he was in the Navy. It was just darn near impossible when he got out. So I gave it a little thought, and I happened to remember his mother. I never liked his mother. I really didn't have any reason not to like her either. And the fact I didn't like her's no big deal either. There were lots of people I didn't like. Whole towns I didn't like. But she was one of those people that didn't believe in drinking anything, you know, except water. So it suddenly dawned on me that possibly could have been Eddie's problem. You know, he wasn't raised in a social drinking family such as mine. Therefore, he probably just didn't know how to drink. So I decided to teach him. Have you ever tried to teach a drunk how to drink? You got at least one problem. You got to get him sober enough to find out if he's learning anything that you're teaching him. So in order to do that, I decided to get him out of California. I actually hated California. To me, it was one large bar separated by an occasional liquor store. And I decided to take him back to the Middle West, where people are really people. You know, that's where I'm from. And that decision lasted till I got to Gallup, New Mexico. I spent 3 of the most miserable days of my life in that godforsaken place. And I only made a little mistake. I stopped. And he got away from me. In fact, he got into a bar I was afraid to follow him into, because from where I was sitting, he and a tribe of Indians went in. And I know what Indians and firewater do when they get mixed up together. You know, I'm a great John Wayne fan, and I wasn't going to let them get me, and I didn't care if they got him, so I just sat outside and waited. Never dawned on me there was a back door, you know. He went in the front door and out the back door, wherever he wanted to go, in the back door, out the front door, and Old Faithful was always spouting right where he'd left her. And I always like to mention the little Indian gal that was standing in front of that place. I really think she was my first contact with that very special something that I feel I have found in Al-Anon. In AA, they call it the unspoken language. But in Al-Anon, at least for me, I think it's the language of the heart. This is the only place in my life I have ever been where I can feel what somebody else is saying. Or I can watch them walk in for the first time. And I don't have to ask them who they are or where they came from or what their husband does or what kind of a car they drive or how many children they have. I don't have to have statistics. What I do is exactly what Cliff said last night. I look in their eyes. Because when I see in their eyes that same, there ain't nobody home here look that I've seen in my eyes, I know where they've been. But the first morning when I looked over at that little Indian gal, I was so embarrassed for her that she would allow herself to be degraded by standing in front of that place, while I am across the street making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 5 children. She looked strange to me. But the second day she looked pretty good, and the third day I kind of hide her, you know, because she had her side of the street and I had mine, and we had, well, if you've ever been to Gallup, New Mexico, you know that's all it is 2 sides of the street. And we had them both covered. But I had to make one of my many decisions while I was there, and I decided I would never again stop where the human race could contaminate my husband. Now, if you're driving across country in an automobile and you don't intend to stop, you do have to make adjustments. And some darn fool told me that Texas had dry counties. That's the adjustment I made. I had taken a course in navigation while Eddie was in the Navy to help him, and so I mapped out a course so that I never stopped unless I was in a dry county, which didn't help a whole lot. I mean, he got just as drunk in a dry one as he would have in a wet one. But when you're going crazy on a slow, easy plan, this will help you. You can spend hours just wondering, where did he get it? I don't know. I don't know where they get it. But I'll tell you what I do know. If I'd have buried him, he'd have come up drunk. I don't know where they get it. I just don't know where they get it, that's all. But my kids think Texas is the biggest place on earth because it took us almost 2 weeks to get through it. See, I didn't know Texas puts one dry one between with two wet ones, you know, and it was kind of an unwritten law as far as those kids were concerned. If she stops and you got anything to do, you better get out, get it done, and get back. She'll never miss you. And that's about the way it was. I concentrated on that seat, and if it was full, we went, and if it was empty, we waited. Very simple way of life, of course. Only God knows how much travel time we lost when he got in the back by mistake and never looked back there. That's not where he's supposed to be. And I could depend on those kids. They wouldn't have said anything because one of their favorite sayings was, "Don't upset her." And that used to upset me, you know. It's only my opinion. That's all I'm offering today is how I think and how I feel. But I don't really believe that my kids reacted to the alcoholic. My kids reacted to my reaction to the alcoholic. Because it's true. Eddie came home drunk lots of times. He did very strange things, too. But they knew he was drunk. They knew he was strange. How do you explain me? I am running the group. And I don't even know where I am half the time. You know, I had one kid, couldn't keep that kid in school to save my soul. I would take him to school, he'd be waiting for me when I got home. And after I got to going to Al-Anon and he got to going to Alateen and we got to where we could talk as people instead of God and the little child, which is the way it had been. I asked him one day, I said, "Bill, why wouldn't you go to school? Didn't you like school?" He said, "Mom, I really did. But I was afraid you'd move while I was gone." And that can be a real fear to a little kid. Anyhow, when I left California, I had 5 children. I have 8 altogether, and usually I make you count them as they creep in just like I did. I was always surprised. And I might add, Eddie was a little shocked, too, when he sobered up. He thought I was babysitting for a living, but anyhow, I knew when I left California that I was expecting a baby, but I always lived on a schedule, you know, make the beds at 7 o'clock. It ain't easy if they don't get up till 8, but things like that, you know. And I had been rather busy, and if you have 5 children, having a baby's no big deal, you know. So I put that at the bottom of the schedule. And I had been busy, really. I set up a dental office, beautiful dental office. I even had patients. No dentist, but nice dental office. And I had been busy with other things, too. So it got kind of close to the time for this baby, and I went up to Kansas City to see this doctor. I don't know whether you realize it or not, but doctors are very happy people. Most of them are just glad you're sick. But this one, he was the joy boy of the world. You should have seen the treatment he gave me. He helped me in, sat me down, patted me on the head, and then he hit me with the bat. "Mrs. Eddy, you're going to have twins." I almost died in his office because I wasn't really counting on 1. He's insisting on 2. And I had problems. I had a dental office, no dentist, plus 5, and that thing I didn't know what to do with. And besides all that, I knew what Eddie was going to say when I told him because he said it. There are no twins in my family. I got so involved defending my moral character that I forgot there were twins in my family. It wasn't until they arrived and my mother said, "Isn't it nice we have another set of twins?" I said, "In whose family?" She said, "Ours." I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" She said, "You never asked me." I never ask anybody anything. Can you think of a better way for people to find out you don't know something than to ask them? Even when I used to get lost, you know, I would pull into the filling station and I'd say to the attendant, "Where are you located?" Because I knew if I found out where he was, I'd know where I was. And the whole point of the whole thing was that he wasn't supposed to know I didn't know. You getting the point? That's the way it used to be. Well, as I told you in the beginning, it was, by the way, I'm getting my revenge. I got on the watch. I can't read. So relax. Anyhow, as I told you in the beginning, it was a letter that Eddie wrote that got me to Al-Anon, and I kid about it a lot. But I am grateful. I'm very grateful. And I'm also grateful that the God, as I understand him today, sent me a sponsor who had the patience of Job. Because I wasn't an easy nut to crack. You had to catch me first, you know. And the first day that Wilma came to my house, she found the front door nailed shut, which was really necessary in a way. You know, I was just in no shape to cover 2 doors. And, well, I was pooped, you know. And, but she went around the back, and the car was in the driveway, and the coffee pot was boiling on the stove, but she couldn't find me. So she went next door to this little old lady, and she asked her whether or not Mrs. Eddy was at home. And do you know what that woman said? Even if she is. She thought I was crazy. And I resented that. I certainly did, because I never bothered that woman. I did once almost get trapped in the backyard with her, but I hid in the bushes till she went in. I didn't like her. And my kids didn't bother her either. I didn't forbid them to go over there. I've always felt forbidding children to do things leave scars, so I always preferred a little psychology, you know, just tell them the story of Hansel and Gretel and let them make up their own minds, you know. You want to end up in an oven? Right over there. But she scared Wilma, I know, because she came back that night. She had a friend with her, and I don't know to this day how she got in. I used to ask her, but it upset her too much, so I had to quit. But I used to get my kids to bed on a production basis. You know, everybody in the tub, everybody washed, rinsed out, dried, dressed in bed, some mother can worry. And Wilma came between the drying and the dressing process. I had all these little naked bodies running around. Hell, I couldn't catch them. I couldn't hide them. I couldn't do anything, you know. But she never even hesitated. She just picked up a towel and she dried and she talked. Alcoholics, Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon family groups. I didn't even know they lived in the neighborhood. But she finally said the magic word, drunks. And I knew why she was there. She needed me. That's what she said. She told me I had survived something that I didn't even know I had. But a whole lot of other people still had it, and she was going to get them together, and we were going to take care of it as a group. Now, that's what it sounded like. But when she left that night, whatever she brought in with her went out with her, and I gave her just time enough to get home. Then I called and told her that something very important had come up. I would be unable to attend the meeting she was scheduling. Now, I hadn't done anything unimportant for a long, long time, but I couldn't let her know that. I couldn't let her find out how unimportant I thought I was. And that probably should have been the first chink in the armor. It should have been the first time I began to realize I never hid from you. I hid from me. Because a long time ago, probably farther back than I could ever find out even if I cared, I got that crazy idea that I didn't measure up to what I thought you thought I ought to be. And so I built a wall. A facade that was supposed to keep you from finding out how truly inadequate I thought I was. And the only sad part of this story is that I'm the one that got lost behind the wall. When I came to Al-Anon, I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I didn't care. I knew it was going to end. I just wanted it to hurry. But you know, even a defect of character puts you in good stead once in a while. I had told this woman I would help her, and I didn't want to be beholden to her, so 2 weeks later, I went to my first meeting in Azusa, California, October of 1957, and I don't tell you that to impress you with the number of years that I've been around, because I'm one of those people that believes that longevity, at least for me, just makes it awfully difficult for me to lie about my age. You see, because no matter how long I've been around, it's still a one day at a time way of life. And the only maybe edge that I have on somebody that's just coming in or has been here for just a short period of time is I know it works. And I keep coming back for that reason. A one day at a time way of life. But I hope I never forget that first meeting. I don't ever, ever want to be an old-timer in this way of life. I was an old-timer when I got here. But what I want to remember is what it felt like to walk from a world of absolute chaos into a place of absolute peace. Nobody asked me who I was, where I came from, what my husband did, where he was. Just the fact that I was there seemed to be number one on the agenda. But when you're as suspicious as I am, you don't take to it right away, at least if you're anything like I was. I took as much of the free literature as I could take, and there weren't a whole lot, you know. Borrowed a book, I didn't want to get financially involved, and I went home and I studied. I memorized the steps and traditions. I even waited 24 hours before I called Wilma and I said, it is not working. I don't feel the least bit better. I told her how hard I had worked, and she listened very patiently, and then she said, well, we don't memorize the steps, we work them. And I realized I'd gotten a sick one, a real sick one, you know. Because I don't know whether you realize it or not, but in all that literature, there's not one direction. There's no tests, there's no nothing. There's a bunch of words, that's all. However, she did make one slight mistake. She said, we use the same steps in Al-Anon they use in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's the way I worked it. You see, I am not powerless over alcohol. I can take it or leave it alone. And if it hadn't been for him, I'd have managed beautifully. So I figured that was his step, and I left it for him. And then the second one had that unfortunate word. It said, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Well, even an idiot knows you got to be nuts if you're going to be restored. And at that particular moment, because they didn't have a lot of treatment centers and so forth, if you wanted to get sober in California at that particular time, you turned yourself into the state of California. My husband was sitting at the Camarillo State Hospital. Now, who do you think I thought was nuts? I figured it was his step, so I left it for him, too. But the third one I skipped for both of us, it asked me to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. Well, I understood him. He did not understand me. And I didn't really hate Eddie enough to turn him over, so I skipped that one for both of us. Now, I wasn't going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, but I used to give it to anybody else on earth, whether they asked for it or not. And the example that I usually use is the freeway that we have in California. When I get on the freeway, I go right over to the left-hand lane. That goes straight ahead, and that's where I'm going. It never fails. Some stinker will get right on behind me, rush past me, move over, and slow down. Which means I got to get over here, get ahead of him, move back over, and slow down. So he will know how I feel. So he gets ahead of me, and then I get ahead of him. And then he gets ahead of me, and then I get ahead of him. About 5 miles up the road, he puts on his right-hand blinker, moves over to the right, and leaves the freeway, just because he's home. I'm 3 miles past my turn. Because he has had control of my life, but I wasn't turning it over to God. However, I did notice when I would call Wilma with little situations, she'd say, well, turn it over. But she never said to whom, and I can understand that. It's an anonymous program. You don't tell everybody who handles the problem. So on this particular day when I called her, she was having a bad time, I guess, I don't know, but when I started to tell her what was wrong, and she snapped at me, which was unusual. She said, oh, for heaven's sake, Winnie, turn it over. And I said, please, Wilma, don't lose your serenity. I know you just don't realize you've never said to whom. Well, she said, I thought you knew. You turn it over to God. I said, no, I don't. I haven't even told him I'm going to Al-Anon yet. And I could tell by her attitude, you know, that this upset her, and I didn't want to upset her. So I began to wonder, what could I turn over to God that he couldn't louse up that would make her happy? Now, that's a typical Al-Anon situation. And finally, about 3 days later, I called her. I said, okay, well, I'm turning something over to God. She said, good. What are you turning over? I said, my ironing. And she said, you're ironing? Well, I said, you said it didn't. Oh, no. She said, it's all right. It's all right. Now, I want you to know God don't like to iron either. Because I used to keep mine in a cabinet in case I got the urge, but I turned it over to him, and his slopped out of the cabinet, ended up in boxes. Eventually, the boxes got to the rumpus room. It was a mess. It was a mess. And every time she'd come over, I'd say, Wilma, I want you to see the ironing. And that's when she'd give me routine number one, you know, it's all right. I figured if it don't bother her and it don't bother him, I'm not going to let it bother me either. And then after an AA meeting one night, this guy walks up and he says, Winnie, you got a bunch of kids, don't you? And I said, yes. I was admitting it by then. And he said, well, I go to an orphanage down in Mexico, and those little guys could sure use anything that possibly your kids could have outgrown. So I promised him I would go right home, I would arrange everything. He could just pick it up at his leisure. But I'm a procrastinator by profession. He didn't follow me home. By morning, I forgot he asked me. Now, sometime after that, and I am not sure the span of time, but I came home from an Al-Anon meeting, and Eddie said, "Oh, Bill was by. He picked up the stuff for the orphanage." I said, "He did?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Where'd you find it?" He said, "Those boxes in the rumpus room." Now, for those of you who have not put it together yet, he got my ironing. And I want you to know that from that day to this, I have no problems turning things over to God. Because my God, as I understand him today, has some of the most unique answers. Because I never would have thought of sending them to Mexico. Now, I don't tell that story to be blasphemous because I think this whole way of life is spiritual. But by the same token, I don't think God wants to listen to me cry for the rest of my life. I don't think the road to happiness means you got to count the cracks on the sidewalk either. If you want my honest opinion, I think it kind of gives him a thrill to hear me laugh, to know that finally I'm really beginning to enjoy this life that he saw fit to give me. So I try to keep a light touch. Now, it doesn't work 100% of the time, but that's okay. If he louses it up, I forgive him. You know, it's as simple as that, see. I had a lot of fun with this program because I think that's what it's all about. And I found out so many things after I began to be able to listen to what was going on around me. You know, I heard my husband, for instance, one night say that he was always ready for my lectures. He was always prepared for my tantrums. But if he came home and I had a smile on my face, it used to scare the hell out of him, you know. And I spent all that time. I don't try to minimize the insidiousness of the disease of alcoholism because it is. But I'm here to attest to the fact that all the crying in the world didn't help. But a good laugh did. Being able to see myself as I am, to accept me as I am, is what I consider to be success today. And I'm one of those people that was brought up to believe that you must be successful. Spent my whole life looking for it, couldn't find it because I didn't know what it was until I got right here. And I found out that success, at least to me, today, is the ability to get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and know who I am. To be content to stand right here and say, my name is Winnie Eddy, and know who I'm talking about. Because you see, all my life, until I came to you, I never had an identity. I was always somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's granddaughter, somebody's something. But I was never me. But it's fun to be me now. It's fun to go through life and let people wonder, is she really that nuts? You know? My sponsor had very insidious ways of getting even with me, and probably one of the worst was when she took the word alcohol out of the first step. And she put my name in there. And she said, now work it. As you know, that's been a long time ago. But as I stand here right this moment and I say to you, I am powerless over Winnie and my life has become unmanageable, I may never get honest enough to tell you all the things that brings to my mind. But I know today who louses up my life, and it's not you, it's not him, and it's not them, it's always me. Because if you tried to do to me today the things I have done to myself in the past, I'd fight. And that's why, regardless of the fun that I poke at the alcoholic, or at Al-Anon, or at myself, I am grateful. I never thought I'd say that. I never thought in those dark, dim days that I would ever be grateful to somebody who had to go through what he went through in order to lead me into this way of life. So when I say my name is Winnie Eddy and I love an alcoholic, that's reality. And that was the gift that you gave me. I'm going to close with a little poem. I use it every time I talk, and it may mean nothing to you, but I'm like Cliff in this way, too. I didn't come over here to help you. I came over here to help me. And if somebody out there gets help, that's just your fault, not mine. But anyhow, my sponsor gave me this at a very low time in my life. My mother was very ill, and I couldn't let go of it. I just couldn't let go of it. And finally, Wilma, I guess, looked at me and knew that she didn't have any words that were going to take me out of that hole I was having so much fun with, so she handed me this little poem. And the first time I heard it, or read it, I had a mental picture of my kids. They used to come to me with a yo-yo, you know, and they'd have the yo-yo clutched in that hand, attached to that hand, and they'd say, "Come on, Mom, get the knot out of the middle." And there was no way I could get the knot out of the middle of that string unless they handed me the yo-yo, you know, and sometimes that's my shortcut when I'm on the freeway and I don't have time for the whole poem. Please, God, I got another knot in the string. But anyhow, it goes like this. As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I took my broken dreams to God because he was my friend. But then instead of leaving him in peace to work alone, I sort of hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last I snatched him back and cried, "How can you be so slow?" "My child," he said, "what could I do? You never did let go. So if I don't leave anything else here today as my gift to you, I hope you'll just remember one thing. If you can let go and let God and let the caring that we're sharing here this weekend be a part of your life one day at a time, you got the recipe for a good day. Because God loves us in spite of all we think we've done. And we love each other in spite of all we think we've done. But would you like to know why I love you? Because in my wildest dreams, I never could have found this way of life without places like this and people like you. So thank you for my life. God bless, and thank you for listening.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.